Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with the One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend, my business partner, Mr. Jason Johnston Yellen. How are you, Jason?
I'm well, thank you, Joshua. Welcome to December.
Yes. Welcome to December. Had to look at my watch for a second there.
December 1 is upon us.
Yeah.
2021 has disappeared in the blinking of an eye, and we're staring 2022 in the face.
How is this possible?
It's not. None of it is.
None
of it is. It's funny. My youngest wants nothing else but to be 12. Nothing else. Because at 12, he's allowed to go to the pool by himself.
Oh.
That is on his radar. And I keep saying to him, don't wish your life away. Don't wish your life away. Enjoy being a living. Enjoy the shortcomings of being a living. And I remember absolutely desperately wishing to be older. And time passed so slowly. So incredibly slowly. And now as a grown-ass man, it just flies by. It's frightening how quickly the time passes, which, to make a whiskey connection, is why whiskey speaks so loudly to me. It's in its own way a metronome. It's a guide for the passing of the years. And when we get a bottle, 2006. What was I doing in 2006? What was the month? It was a summer month. Where did I go that year? Who did I hang out with that summer? Like it's a series of signposts to the past.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I like that. I only look for 1973, right? Sometimes 1974 if I'm feeling charitable.
Right.
But I hadn't even thought of
Thank you. I appreciate you being charitable. I got the reference. I don't know if anyone else got the reference. I got it.
But yeah, that's interesting. You know, just before we started recording, you had talked about, looking at single casks and approaching them not necessarily from the perspective of I've heard good things about the single cask, but from the perspective of, this one, the cask was filled near my son's birthday or on the month or even on the day. And or this one was bottled on so-and-so's birthday. And I never thought about whiskey in that way. Now, I use them as signposts. I'll look at bottles and say, where was I when I got that? But I don't often go beyond the 1973, 1974 signpost, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'll tell you one that really gets my attention. It's getting a little more expensive now. But fall of 1996 always gets my attention. Because it now marks my very real foray into this industry, into this hobby, into this passion, into this subject. That was my single malt birth at the University of Aberdeen. And so seeing August, September, October, November, December 1996, and it just really captivates me that just as I was starting to ask the questions about this whole fucking thing, right? What is whiskey? That those casks were being laid down.
Yeah.
They were being mashed. They were being fermented.
Yeah.
They were being run through stills. They were being put into cask. It's really remarkable looking back and thinking about that. And as for this year, those were coming out as 25-year-old bottles.
Oh my gosh. Oh, Jesus.
Which is what I mean by it's getting more expensive to have that.
It's something to think about. In 1996, if we were standing in 1996 right now, and we had said, where was I 25 years ago? That would have been 1971.
Yeah, neither one of us would have been born.
Neither one of us have been born. Listen, I have a question for you. I want to keep it on whiskey. Speaking...
Not like us.
Speaking of special dates, my wife and I went out to the casino for our anniversary, right?
Oh, big spender.
Yep. Big loser. We all we did was lose money. We had fun, but we lost money.
Is there a Demi Moore style scene in any of this?
Like a G.I. Jane one?
I was thinking more Robert Redford Proposal.
Oh, that one. No, none of that happened.
I don't know if you'd be the Woody Harrelson role or the Demi Moore role.
I tell you, give me $1 million and I'm fine. So...
Everyone's got their price.
So we're... Oh, wait a second. No, this was not our anniversary. We had come back. That's what it was. We'd come back because Haida had purchased us tickets to see Chelsea Handler. And so we get to the casino, and we've got a little bit of time for some food and for some drinks. And so we went to this restaurant in there that serves great pizza, and they have video games. Now, there wasn't a table ready for us, so we had to have some drinks.
I love the fact that this started out with, I've got a question for you. Let me set the scene. So, continue.
Yeah. So, the table wasn't ready for us, so we decided to get some drinks and play some video games. We ended up playing some pinball, some Star Wars pinball. And Haida had gotten just a glass of wine. And I look on their shelf, and normally I don't buy whiskey. If I'm out at a restaurant or at a bar, I simply don't buy whiskey. I'm there for a beer. I'm there for a cocktail. I may do wine, but I'm definitely not going to do whiskey.
You mean if you're out with your wife? Because you and I have been in plenty of bars where we've bought plenty of whiskey. You're meaning when you go out with your wife for a nice date night?
Yes. So I want to be clear here. We were just at a restaurant that had maybe 10 bottles of whiskey.
Makes sense.
3 of them were bourbon, and
American bourbon?
American bourbon. American bourbon.
Continue.
And then the rest...
Get away from me.
The rest were Scotch whiskey, and I think there may have been Jameson up there as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so when I'm not out with you, if I'm just at a restaurant, I'm just at a bar, I'm not ordering whiskey. I'm ordering anything but
Our
whiskey.
date night looks very different.
Our date night is very different. But a bottle of Lafroig 10 captured my eye.
I was going to ask you if there was Lafroig 10 on the shelf. It's always on the shelf. Like Lafroig 10 is always there.
And so I said, you know what? I'm going to get Lafroig 10. So I got the Lafroig 10. I got it neat, of course. And so we're playing some video games, and I'm sipping on it. I'm just enjoying.
Did it come in a tumbler, or did you request a wine glass? Were you playing it low key and you just accepted what you were given?
I was playing it very low key. I was just, you get what you get, and you don't get upset. And the fact that I was offered the liquid without ice, right? I was happy. So I just got it in a tumbler. And so we're playing our video games. I'm sipping on it, just enjoying the drink, And
hopefully the company.
And that's right, the company. And of course, and I look at our the wait staff, and she says, your table's ready. So we sit down, and I just kind of paused and thought about it, and I said to Haida, I'm really surprised that I got a whiskey. I just don't normally buy whiskey at a random restaurant when they have just a handful of bottles. But this Lafroig 10 captured my attention. And she'd said, have you talked to Jason about this, like on the podcast? And I had said, well, no. And I did explain, that you and I have a different bar experience, but that's mostly because we're going to bars that are specifically whiskey bars, right? They're not just your run-of-the-mill restaurant.
Yeah.
And it got me to thinking, what does Jason go for when he's at a run-of-the-mill restaurant? And so what do you go for and why? And is it whiskey? Do you rarely buy whiskey like I do, or do you go for the cocktails? Do you go for the beer? What do you do?
Yeah, I'm definitely not going to a restaurant thinking I'm drinking an entry-level pour for a price that I don't need to pay for it. I've got an open bottle at home. This is my same philosophy as if I go out for dinner, I never order pasta. Because pasta is something you can rustle up in your own home and do a good job of. You don't need to pay for it. Now, obviously, if you go out to a very nice restaurant that's making their own pasta, that's a very different experience. Yes. But I'm not going to go to a normal restaurant and pay for them to put a box of pasta in hot water for me.
But they're serving ranzoni, Jason. They're serving ranzoni.
That's a reference that's going to travel well. Australians are loving this. And so it's the same for me, right? And it is that Laphroaig 10 kind of. I'm looking at it right here on a shelf right beside me. I could pour that right now, thoroughly enjoy it, not think too deeply about it. However, I have had experiences, and funnily enough, in Scotland, where I've been out with my brother. And we've been bar hopping, or we've been getting dinner, or we've just been hanging with other friends. And I haven't wanted to drink 20-ounce pints.
Yeah.
I've just wanted a cheeky wee whiskey to give me something to sip on while we're engaged in conversation. And I always order Laphroaig 10 in that scenario.
Okay, so you're in a bar. And you've got Laphroaig 10 there. You've got Ardbeg 10. You've got Kilchoman Mac'Uirbe.
I'd probably buy the Kilchoman, give them a little bit of support out in the wild.
Okay.
For me at that point, it's not that I've got a top 1, 2, 3 in mind on how I would rank those three. For me, it's I like all three of those. I would happily drink any of those three. And if I can get to, say, Kilchoman and have the wait staff or the bar staff dealing with that bottle of Kilchoman, then I feel like I've done something for the smaller, independently owned distiller. So it's not even really about the whiskey at that point. It's not really about the price at that point, which I am curious about. What did you pay for your Laphroaig 10?
That was a $14 pour at a casino. That's not terrible at a casino.
Holy moly! Was that an ounce? Was it 2 ounce? Was it half a bottle?
It was, as the kids say, 2 fingers.
Horizontal or vertical?
Those are
or split.
Had 2 tiers. The glass had 2 tiers of it. It was. It was the horizontal. It was two fingers worth of width. Like, it was a decent
in a tumbler.
In a tumbler,
decent,
right? Yeah, I would say it was. It may have been 2 ounces worth.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, 14. Yeah, it seems fine if that's your quantity. I've still got Scottish measures in mind where it's a 25 mil, unless you get to go to some places that are still 35 mil. But gosh, 25 mil barely wets the bottom of the glass. But you can't argue with the price.
Can't argue with the price.
Cheap as chips.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So there you go. So you did what you would have done what I did, which was you saw the Laphroaig 10. I'll go for that. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, though, that as much as Laphroaig 10 is billed as the love it or hate it whiskey, it's interesting how many bars count it among their bottles, even when they only have 8 or 10 or 12 bottles. To my mind, it's almost it's almost to peated Scotch what Jameson is to Irish. If someone comes in and says, you got a peated whiskey, you say, yep, we got Lafroig 10, boom, they order it. They don't walk away at that point. You got an Irish? Yeah, it's Jameson. Yep, I'll take some. Cheers. They don't walk away at that point. And so it's a catch-all. I think it's harder to find Lagavulin 16 on a back bar. I'm not even sure how often I would have seen Kilchoman, Macker Bay, or even Sineig on a limited back bar.
Yeah. I mean, we could really get in the weeds and just see, well, how many POs does this casino want to issue to the distributor that has such and such bottling, right? It just may be that they do more business with distributor A, who has Beam products, than they do with distributor B that has Diageo products.
Exactly. And to Joshua, what Joshua always does to me, PO, purchase order, that's the request that goes out to the distributor to bring the bottles to your establishment.
Yes, I was not talking about a post office. I was talking about a purchase order.
Or a PU.
That's a PU. To get PO'd would be to be pissed off.
Or DQ'd.
DQ. How does...
To be disqualified.
DQ'd. I thought that was some sort of like a Cleveland steamer or something.
It's always the Cleveland steamer with you. So the reason I brought up December 1 all those hours ago is because you and I have 3 podcasts to put out this month to close out the calendar year. It doesn't close out the season. That happens mid-Feb with the mailbag episode. Okay. But we have got our final American Single Malt chat of the year this episode. We have our final World Single Malt chat mid-December. And then we will do our traditional year in review episode, which will drop December 20. Quickly tries to do 3 weeks of drops because it's the 1st and then it's the 15th and it's the 29th. December 29, you and I will close out the calendar year with a year in review. And like I said in the last episode or a couple of episodes ago, I am thinking about my category fillers there for what we discuss in the year in review episode. So with that said, today we're doing one of those little fun things that we do, which is you go off on a little adventure and you take the recording equipment with you and you report back. And I believe I'm right in saying this is the very first time Elijah has accompanied you on one of these little excursions. And you were both involved in the interview today.
That is 100% correct. So me, Elijah, and our good friend Johnny, a.k.a. Whiskey and Donuts, a.k.a. just a wonderful guy all around, went to Portland to visit with the folks at Westward and basically spent 2 days with Miles Munroe, who we're speaking with today.
And Miles's role is?
So Miles is the head distiller and head blender for Westward.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, he's also the chief executive, lovely guy, the CELG. Yeah.
A vital position. Vital.
Yep. Oh my gosh. We had an absolute blast. He and I were definitely two peas in the pod, right? He came from music and being in bands and similar bands. And he talks about it a little bit in the podcast as well, you know, where he talks about being in bands. And he and I just have very similar tastes. And as soon as I met him, I knew that we were going to hit it off. And we did. And what was nice about being with him in their barrel house, like you had said, is we had Elijah with us, and he joined the conversation begrudgingly. I told him he had to be a part of it.
Yeah.
But he had some great questions that I think really helped helped the conversation. It helped me to better understand Westward and what they're doing, and hopefully helped the listeners as well.
Well, I'm ready to jump into it. I'm ready to hear Elijah asking questions on wax for the first time. Let's go over to both of you.
Let's do it. So we're sitting here with you, Mr. Miles Munroe. This is the beautiful thing about a podcast. I'm the editor, so I can fuck up all I want. I was just like,
it's your world.
So we're sitting here with Mr. Miles Munroe at Westward's warehouse, lovingly called Jenny.
We're sitting in the barrel house,
Sitting
right
in the
here,
barrel
among
house.
the barrels, literally.
Which is a really nice place to be. And how many samples have we gone through so far? We're at 9 now?
We just went through 9 single barrel samples. Yeah, cast strength. You guys are champions.
Champions.
Really just hanging tough.
Professionals.
And so just to frame it for the listeners here, so we're sitting around a barrel, and Elijah actually runs an Instagram live series called Banter About the Barrel.
Correct.
So this is perfect. So we have some samples here in front of us. We have the one barrel that seems to have really talked to us the most, 423.
Yes.
And then we also have a beer here. We don't have to talk about that, but for our listeners out there, 423, it was a number 2 char, which that's just what Westward does. So what I'm trying to get to is I feel as if we're tasting some of the best of what Westward does. So can you talk about how you get there? Like let's hear about your process. We went through the distillery.
Yeah.
And, for our listeners out there who may be more Scotch whiskey focused or traditional single malt production focused, you're not traditional.
We're not. I mean, if I could really simplify it, I'd say, we're inspired by beer, and we're making it similar to a Scotch. We're also aging it like a bourbon. And so, I mean, yeah, our vision is pretty simple. Our approach is we want the raw materials to really come through well and to feature that in the whiskey. And so our methods, we are ex-brewers making whiskey. So, our methods are more rooted in brewing, in the brewing culture in Portland and the craft brewing culture in the States. We're making an American single malt. So you have to think, as you pioneer that category, what does that mean? What do we have to offer to the world of whiskey?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's amazing single malts made all over the world. So, what is it that we can add to, the world of single malt? And yeah, I mean, again, our culture here in Portland is heavily rooted in brewing. We're all ex-brewers, our founder, myself, all of my distillers. So yeah, we're relying on a lot of that knowledge and the techniques of brewing to make our whiskey. Yeah. So, I mean, and everywhere from the beginning of the malt is base malt. It's called brewer's base malt. It's just pale ale malt is what we're using,
Okay.
It's a high color malt, so it's kilned a little longer. So it's got a little more of those Maillard reactions, a lot more flavor in the grain. And then we're using a brewer's yeast. We're using pale ale yeast. It's actually what brewers call the Chico yeast. It's the Sierra Nevada pale ale yeast strain.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, right away, we're just taking a hard left and going somewhere else with it.
Yeah.
That isn't to say we don't have reverence for whiskey and for, tradition that's come before us. We definitely do. We just think there's a lot more room for so much more flavor to be expressed in whiskey.
Yeah. I feel as if this approach to single malt production, American single malt, right, is taking a very different approach than Scotland and Ireland, where, when they make single malt and so on, where the focus is always on the cask. How old is it? What kind of cask was that whiskey in? And you guys are you're really front loading a lot.
That's the word.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Yes.
And, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of the work and the care that we put into this whiskey is up front. So I love front loading. That's a great term for it.
TM.
Yeah. Oh, it's all yours.
Yep,
yeah,
okay,
cool. But that's it. That's where most of our focus is, because we're talking about flavor development and where you get flavor from. And we are much less cask focused. Definitely the grain, the yeast as well. I mean, it's a long fermentation. It's 96 to 120 hours.
Wow.
Low temp, 73, 74 degrees. Really just a cool, long fermentation, especially for a whiskey, and especially for an American whiskey. It's in, closed stainless steel tanks, right? So, yeah, it's very much a brewer's fermentation.
So, what does that cold fermentation do? Like, why are you looking for a colder fermentation as opposed to a warmer fermentation? Does it develop flavors? Does it allow the yeast to live a bit longer? What's going on there?
I mean, a lot of things, and those for sure. So if your fermentation is too hot and you're stressing out your yeast, they're going to produce a lot of off flavors, what we would consider flaws, really. Yeah. These congeners that, can be read as, like tar, burnt rubber. I mean, that actually then translate through the still as these really like solventy, kind of unpleasant, nail polish remover, paint thinner, which, I think distillers can, in the moment when they're making their cuts, decide on, where they're diverting that to, when they're going to start collecting their hearts, the shape of their still. For us, our philosophy is why even create any off flavors to begin with? Yeah. Really. I liken it often to minimalist cooking. I said that earlier today when we were walking around the distillery. It's getting excellent raw ingredients, treating them well, not manipulating them too much, and really letting those shine through. Yeah. And that's the idea. So, when we're done with our fermentation, when our wash is on its way to the still, it already tastes great. I mean, you guys got to sip the wash earlier delicious. Today. It's an unhopped pale ale, really. Yeah. It's really pleasant. And in that way, it's also a minimalist approach to distilling. We have these custom stills that have very short columns compared to the size of, the pot, the body itself. Even the line arm, what did you call it? Like cute or adorable? What's the word?
I think it's adorable. Adorable. And I also thought it was dainty. Like it was just so. It was like drinking tea and your pinky's up. Yes, that's what it is.
Pinky's up. Yeah. Well, so it's a very short run through the line arm, and it's angled down. It's angled aggressively
really
down
steep
towards the condenser. Yep. So so really that cool fermentation is key to everything because it's making a really flavorful, really wonderful wash that doesn't really have too much in the way of flaws. Yeah. And then we get to have this, low reflux custom pot still retain all of that character. Okay. So very important.
So, so that's your fermentation DNA, right? That's how you get to it. This will be sort of a longer question here. So one of the things that fascinated me, because I didn't know this until last night, is you guys started in 2005, which is really early on for the craft distilling movement within the U.S. And so you spend a lot of time figuring out your beer, figuring out your wash that you're going to distill. And then you distill it, and then it becomes a whiskey. And I'm curious, was there a point, or maybe this has happened a few times, where you said, you know what, we're not loving how it's turning out. We need to adjust the fermentation. Was there that tweaking back and forth? And you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, we got started a long time ago, 17 years now, and our founder bonkers. Christian and his partner at the time, who helped start the distillery, they were old Portland brewers, had been brewing in the early mid 90s and late 90s, had this idea that excellent beer can make excellent single malt. So they started down that journey. And so, the experimentation really wasn't focused on temperature and length of fermentation, more of which yeast strain do we think is actually going to make the best single malt. But then also, of course, considering which one really speaks to, I think, what people have in mind as far as craft beer from the States, because again, wanting to tie some kind of identity to what American single malt could be when there was no definition and there was really no example to look to before that. So our experimentations have been more with, let's try a Scottish ale strain, early days, or let's try a Belgian strain. Let's try pale ale, see which one we think is really ideal. And knowing that, Sierra Nevada is just such a classic American craft beer, known all over, that, those were kind of the flavor profiles that we were going for. Yeah.
there was just a brief aside. I was traveling to Scotland, and on the way back, there was this this woman who was serving us at the restaurant that we were at, and we were asking her what beers they had. And she was Polish. She had a thick Polish accent, really fun. And she said, I'm not going to try to do the accent, but she said, we have this beer, and then we have this beer, and then we have the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Like, I'm sorry, come again?
Love
Pale Ale. Pale Ale.
How exotic.
Yeah, right? Ooh, Pale Ale. Right, okay, so you go through that experimentation, and you figure out what your final product is. And so I guess, what is it? How would you describe your DNA of your whiskey?
Westward is robust. It's full of character. I mean, again, just that minimal, very low reflux pot still. For us, I want the grain to come through. I want you to taste the grain. For us, the fermentation is the majority of the flavor driver. Like, I want kind of, so for a lot of American distillers, they would say they want 60 to 70% of their character to come from the barrel.
Yeah.
And I'm saying I want 60 to 70% to come from the fermentation.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, our DNA, again, is rooted in beer. I mean, I hate to hit this point over the head, but I mean, we truly are brewers inspired by beer making single malt, So, yeah, in our DNA are those characteristics of stone fruit, tropical fruit, floral, honey, nice grain notes. And, with our high color grain, comes nuttiness, biscuit, chocolates, both, kind of dark, dry cacao and some nice lush brown sugar and milk chocolate as well. So, I mean, all those come together and, balance out with the wood. I mean, for us, you're asking about the DNA, like, my biggest concern during maturation is over oaking my whiskey. Because we are going into virgin charred American oak. It's an aggressive, it's an assertive wood. It's going to lend a lot of character to it. So, we don't really feel like age statements are something that apply to what we're doing. I say we age to taste. It's all about maturity. If that whiskey's ready, then it's ready, and I'm going to put it in a blend. So generally that's 4.5 to 6 years, anywhere from there. But yeah, I mean, we just, at the end of the day, anytime we're blending or innovating, trying something new, or just doing the same thing day in and day out, there's two questions. Is it balanced, and does it taste good? And, that's where we're at.
Yeah.
Something that you brought up earlier, you said from a great beer comes a great whiskey. I love that, and I think that's epitomized what Westward has done, what we've tasted today. Another story that you brought up is kind of your pep talk to new distillers and new hires about like creating consistency and creating a consistent wash. Like, I found that fascinating because the samples we all tried today were wildly different and wildly interesting and engaging and exciting. But you have that consistent wash, and maybe you can give a little insight into the story about like what your pep talk is to those new hires and people who have to do the consistent fermentation and distillation.
I mean, so we say we are craft distillers, and that term craft gets tossed around a lot.
Yeah,
okay, what does that mean exactly? Well, to me, a craft, whether it's making whiskey or beer or carving wood or whatever your craft is, to me, that means, like, I don't think you're ever going to master it. It's just every day going in and doing what you did yesterday, but trying to do it just a little better, or trying to learn a bit more about the process. To me, that's a craft. And so, yeah, the pep talk, which, some brewers understand and some have no interest in, is, I hope you like lager brewing, because that's basically, day in and day out, you are making the same thing, because as you guys tasted with the single barrels today, each one, even, we tasted two that were from the exact same run off the still, and were very different whiskeys. So if we don't have consistency at the beginning with the wash, I mean, my job as, the blender would be impossible. So that's just, and here's the thing. There's so much innovation going on with craft distilling right now, and it's wonderful to see. people sometimes ask us, you know, are you going to make a rye? Are you going to make a bourbon? You guys, seriously, you're just stuck on single malt? And it's like, yeah, I don't think we want to do anything but single malt. Wow. And, you know, we want to keep making American single malt and just continue to elevate that category.
What a weird thing to be saying, like, you're stuck on single malt. It sounds almost negative, but I think you're, like, you as well as, you know, I know there's the American Single Malt Whisky Commission, you know, and you guys are working with the TTB to create this new category of American single malt. If you're being stuck on something, you're being stuck on something that's going to explode in a really good way.
Look, I mean, we're not looking at American single malt as some kind of passing fad. Yeah. Like, we are putting a stake in the ground, and this is a category that we think has so much potential to be one of the best whiskeys in the world. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you know, whiskey's fun, and we, of course, love to have fun with it. At the same time, yeah, this is our craft. This is our mission.
Back to Elijah's question, because I thought it was really good about that consistency of creating your wash. And you can make lager every day, and it's going to be the same or it's going to be slightly better. But then, like you had said, we tasted 2 barrels that were filled on the same day, and they were wildly different. Is that frustrating? Is it exciting? What's your approach there?
There is a Zen approach to whiskey you have to have, or it will drive you mad. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you can't handle that, it's not the thing to do. Definitely. Yeah, I mean, we are, of course, always striving for consistency, but at the same time, I don't feel like from batch to batch as I'm blending, it needs to taste exactly the same. Mm-hmm. When I'm sitting down with my assistant blender and we're tasting through a bunch of barrel samples and starting to build a blend, we always have, you know, previous bottlings around to taste and reference to, and, you know, just to make sure that we're kind of on track. But honestly, so for me, I don't know if you guys ever put fresh cracked black pepper on mango.
Can't say I have.
But that
sounds amazing.
So to me, in my mind, like, I don't go by a flavor wheel. We don't have like, okay, here are the 5 points of, you know, different flavors that we're trying to hone in on when doing a blend. I know that when in the back of my palate, when I'm starting to get hints of like cracked pepper and mango, that I'm getting close to the blend that I want. Like, that's where I'm at.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, okay. So that's your DNA. Is that, you know, there's a lot of people that will refer to a distillery as having a key element, right? Balvenie is the honeyed malt. Glenallachie has the butterscotch, and you know, Ardbeg is ashy, and Westland is known for being chocolatey, you know, with their 5 malt blend. Like, is that cracked black pepper and mango that's your signifier there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love tasting westward between bourbons, like doing like a whiskey of the world, or, you know, some tasting where there's, you know, various American whiskeys, and to have westward between 2 bourbons blows people's minds.
Yeah.
They're just like mango, papaya, stone fruit, peach, apricot, like, what is happening? It's just an assault of delicious ripe fruit. Yeah.
That's absolutely wild.
Yeah.
So here's a question. I want to dig into this blending aspect a little bit. I want to make sure I ask this correctly. Like, I'm just curious.
Better come correct, man. Yeah, don't.
I'm just curious of the frustration factor, right? Because you're putting together. You mentioned before your batch is around 18, 20 barrels, something like that.
Yes.
And
very little room for error.
Right. So you have just a small room for error. And if I'm being honest, we tasted through 9 samples, and I would say, of the 9 samples, maybe 3 of them I got some of that pepper, that peppery note going on. And so what is it like when you're dealing with these 18 to 20 casks to get to that specific thing that you want to put forth as this is westward?
Well, so before we're even in the blending room, we are out here in the barrel house, and we'll gather probably 50 or 60 samples of barrels. Okay. And then we will narrow that down. We'll actually first kind of check them for flaws. So we'll bring it down to like 10% and really just kind of nose and look for some flaws.
You bring the cask samples down to 10% ABV?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of a common thing for sensory. You really get an idea of what kind of flaws are there. Like they really stand out around that proof, that percentage. So then we'll kind of narrow it down to about 35 or so. That's when we're in the blending room and narrowing it down to about 18 or 20, right? I have this approach. I remember seeing ever seen like the perfumer's blending pyramid?
No.
So I kind of work off that method where you've got like your base notes, right? And that makes up the majority of your blend. And then you've got these mid notes that kind of start to tie elements together. And then your top notes are just a few things that kind of jump out of the glass when it's all blended together, that it kind of hits your nose first, right? And so in narrowing down, we're coming across barrels that, this one's got more of that kind of brown sugar, lush, really nice, like kind of ripe stone fruit. Like that's our base. We're going to use those barrels as base. And so we kind of just build off that. Yeah. Top notes are, some of that kind of cracked pepper or like really wild, tropical fruit, some nice kind of floral notes as well. Lavender, which you kept picking up
so
in there.
Yep.
So there's, there's a method. But it's more of just kind of building it up, to like eventually get to that place. Yeah. And so what I love about our single barrel program and, like you guys sitting down and tasting through all these things is every once in a while there's this outlier that is just like amazing on its own, right? Because there's a lot of barrels that you taste and they're good, but they're not interesting on their own. Yeah.
Yep.
And there's some that, their idiosyncrasies make them these wild barrels that were just like, I can't even put this in a blend because this should be featured on its own. This really should just be out in the world as its own. Yeah. And so that's something I love about our single barrel program is actually giving these, one out of every 50, 60 barrels a chance to like shine on their own out in the world. Yeah.
It's awesome.
And not just bury them in a blend.
Yep. Yeah, they need to shine. So one of the things I noticed walking into the barrel room is that it's all 53-gallon barrels and up. Well, there's one 30-gallon barrel that I saw there. But was that a decision from the get-go, and what drove that decision to go with full-size barrels out the gate?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's a great observation, and we have, since day one, always filled into full-size ASBs, the 200-liter, 53-gallon barrels. I think for us, I think it's been proven. I think it's like empirical knowledge that size barrel is pretty ideal for American whiskey. Mm-hmm. It really is. Mm-hmm. And kind of going back to what is an identifying factor of American single malt? What can we kind of say? This is also part of what we think American single malt is for us. Yeah, and that is aging in ASBs. I think you want to challenge people's expectations as far as single malt goes, but also I think connect the dots in saying that this is still made in the States. So you are going to still get some of these elements that you would expect from American whiskey. Yeah. Right? And so, a virgin charred white American oak cask, ASB, to us, that's a hallmark of American whiskey. Yeah. So, we've always gone into full-size barrels, nothing smaller than a 53-gallon. Except, the 30. It's an experiment just to try. I don't even know how we even came across that barrel. But other than that, so for like Pinot cask, we're going into barriques, French oak barrel that's held Pinot Noir. So, and we've messed around with some larger format too. We've done some punch-ins here and there. But we've always felt that full-size ASBs really were the way to go. Yeah. Which, early days in a whiskey distillery means you're waiting even that much longer for your whiskey to be done. We kind of did it the hard way, for sure.
Paid off 17 years later, I guess, right?
That's right. Hey, man, nothing will teach you patience like making whiskey. Seriously.
Touching on maturation, and this is something Joshua brought up earlier with the American Single Malt Commission. Westward was a founding member of the American Single Malt Commission. And in previous podcasts that Joshua and Jason have hosted featuring American single malt producers, a question that kind of came up is regionality. And, with Scotch whiskey and us Scotch whiskey lovers, everything's, there's a lot of discussion about, those lines are blurred now, but but talking about region and how, where this is, what distillery this is made at and what region and the way it affects flavor. Do you think, as it looks like American Single Malt Whiskey will be passed as an official category? This is awesome news. Do you think there's going to be some sort of regional identifier when bottling American Single Malt? Like, do you think there's like an Oregon Single Malt Whiskey versus, like Santa Fe Spirits, like New Mexico Single Malt Whiskey, or etc. Balcones in Texas. Yeah.
I mean, if you're asking me right now, which obviously you are, I would say no. I don't see their. I see it less as regional developments and more of maker developments. This is where I feel like a lot of single malt makers in the States, even though a lot of us are inspired by beer, start to kind of head down that winemaker path of like, so you're a brewer, you're making stout, you have recipes. Generally, you try to stay into the category of like what's expected of that beer style, right? Winemakers, I'm making Pinot Noir, but this is how I make Pinot Noir. This is my version of Pinot Noir, right? And this is this year's vintage, and this is how I like to do it. Yeah. That doesn't mean there isn't terroir, and there isn't a very distinctive maker's mark to that wine. Mm-hmm. And, it's like Westward. I think Westward is a whiskey of the elements. I mean, we're using Pacific Northwest grown barley. Yep. We're using yeast that we get from brewers right here in Portland. Mm-hmm. We're aging right here in the Willamette Valley. So, I mean, I think there are some very, distinctive identifiers to what we're doing. Having said that, I think right now, when we got started, there were maybe 36 craft distilleries in the country, and there's well over 2,000 now. And I mean, we're close to, I think, 200 single malt makers at this point.
Wow.
In the US.
Really?
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think the most compelling thing about the category is that while we're all, for the most part, quality minded, we're doing it our way, And to me, that's great. That's just... that isn't innovating just for the sake of innovating. That's like exploring new ways to express more flavor. Yeah. I said this earlier. Whiskey's 5 elements. It's grain, it's yeast, it's water, it's wood, and it's time. Yeah. And even just the smallest tweak of any of those, and you're getting something entirely different. Not just that different element, but how it interacts with all those other elements as well.
Yeah, exactly. That one little left turn takes everything else with it. Mm-hmm. In a fun way. Exactly.
Yeah. American Single Malt Commission, like the standards, the guidelines, the rules, seem to have kind of a openness to and gives the freedom for a lot of distilleries. There's good standards there, but there's also a freedom depending, what resources what raw resources you're using, maturation types, maturation time. Like there's no limit, for example, on that. I think that's pretty interesting for the future of American Single Malt. And I don't think you're the first person to say that it's not about a region, but it's more about the flavor. I think that's really fascinating. Yeah. That it's more the flavor is the identity of the distillery rather than the region, or this is a style that we're choosing because we're Oregon Single Malt.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of us are just taking inspirations from so many different areas, not just in whiskey making. I mean, I like here at the Barrel House, I practice élevage that's inspired by winemaking. How I treat my barrels and some of the maturation techniques are also inspired by cognac making, and just like sitting down with some of these amazing, brandy makers and just kind of picking their brain and really just having more of a like philosophical discussion about distillation and maturation rather than like actual techniques. It's just your approach. And I think that's part of the culture here in Portland too. There's so many makers, there's so many creative people here, and we're very collaborative. We're always interested in what someone else is doing. Yep. This restaurant or this brewery, you're like, what are you guys up to? Oh, that's amazing. Like we should do something together. And to me, that just continues to build more and more creative endeavors. That to me, that's the hallmark of it. It's funny. We're kind of caught in between. So there's so many rules in Scotland about whiskey, and then there's so few rules about whiskey in Japan, and you kind of see how that goes in, in both
exactly.
ways, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, informing the Single Malt Commission was like, okay, let's have some guidelines, some things that I think can give, whiskey lovers, consumers an idea of somewhat of what to expect, just some standards, you can say. But then also, wording some of those rules in a way that really just continue to encourage experimentation and trying new things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that collaborative element, right? We all help each other out in some way. Like you look out for one another, which is kind of cool.
Absolutely. I hope it stays this way forever. I mean, in the world of craft distilling, I think there is that like all ships rise with the tide.
Yeah.
Still, obviously, there's a fun competitive edge to it. I mean, everybody wants to be the best and kind of put your stuff out there, but ultimately, we're all just having a ton of fun doing this. This is a really cool thing. So, yeah.
And touching on that collaborative effort, you mentioned briefly about getting yeast from breweries. Like you told us earlier while we were at the distillery, you just call them up and say, hey, need some yeast. It's not a specific brewery you go to, but it's, distilleries all through Portland. I found that super interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just the nature of it. And, same thing with, from the other end, brewers calling me, hey man, you got some empty whiskey barrels? I'm trying to age this stout. What do you got?
Yep.
And at this point, with our stout cask, we've worked with 45 or 50 breweries all around, Oregon and Southern Washington, and probably, 8 or a dozen different wineries for the Pinot cask. There's actually one barrel that we've traded back and forth. It's just one single barrel, 7 times with the same brewery. This is a brewery that I used to work for 15 years ago now.
Yeah.
We call it the Heritage Barrel.
Yeah.
And it's just gone back and forth over and over. And I actually just this summer got it scraped, toasted, and recharred because after 6 fills, it was kind of not really doing anything. It was kind of just became this like neutral barrel. We just brought it back to life, and I gave it back to the brewery. So
it's awesome.
It's like, why not?
Earlier today, you were talking about being in the UK and being in Europe for 3 weeks or so?
Yeah,
About
it
3
just
weeks?
was.
And you did a class with Dave Broom, and you're talking about American Single Malt to the class. And I'm just curious of, what are people outside of the U.S. thinking about American Single Malt? Do they have preconceived notions about it? Like, I feel as if American Single Malt will spend a good portion of time pushing water uphill, and the water may be a bit different over on the other side of the pond. So, what are some of the challenges that you're facing there?
Well, yeah, we've been pushing uphill for quite a long time, mostly here in the States. So we've launched in Australia, and we've been in Europe for a couple of years, and honestly, the biggest hurdles have been here in the States.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I think. People just tend to struggle with understanding why we're not making bourbon,
Yeah.
Why aren't we doing that?
Yeah.
So just being over at like Whiskey Live in Paris, and then the whiskey show in London with Dave Brum and I and Chris from Westland all talking about American Single Malt.
Yep.
We had a microphone getting passed around, the audience, and it was at the end of the night too, so everyone was like pretty well ready to talk about whiskey.
Yep. They were lubricated.
They were indeed. Yeah. The response was across the board positive. And I think that what we're doing as far as challenging people's expectations of whiskey is catching people off guard, but in a good way. It's a really positive response. It's just like, a lot of what I hear was, I've never tasted single malt like this. And that, but then followed up by, this is delicious. I love this. This is great.
The most important follow-up.
Yeah, that's the big one for sure. Yeah. Do they enjoy it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't feel like there's too much resistance or a lack of understanding about what we're doing.
Yeah.
Really, I think people are very excited about it.
Yeah.
Even last year, was it last year? Time. I think it was early 2020. We did the World Whiskey Forum. It's all single malt makers from all over the world. We were all in Seattle.
Yeah, I was meant to be there.
And there were Scottish distillers there that
Yeah.
we're just like, man, I'm so jealous
Yeah.
of what you guys get to do and
Yeah.
experiment with, and we feel like we're kind of like a little,
SWA is really tight with the regulations.
Yeah.
Like, and we've had another. So we have the two podcasts. We have One Nation Under Whiskey, and then we have Extra Extra. It's all about whiskey. And, well, at least as far as today goes, the next episode is going to be focusing on American Single Malt. And what I love about these new rules is that, A, it's tightened some things up, but it's left room for creativity and so much room. It's much more than the SWA allows the Scottish producers, which is really nice for you guys. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that.
I love it. And that's, I mean, we primarily discussed that at the talk with Dave Brum was, we're about to get this designation, this protected official term put on the books.
Yeah.
American Single Malt.
Yep.
It's a big deal, especially here where everything is very bourbon-centric. And I love bourbon. Nothing against bourbon. I think it's great. We just, need to make a little room for us, too. And so having this designation, really does, I think, put just that much more, I guess, legitimacy to the category. I think in, like, consumers' eyes.
Yeah.
Obviously we think what we're doing is very legit, But, I think it's a very, very important step.
So I know you have a question. Let me just ask this before I forget it. I think the category is going to put legitimacy in the eye of the consumer, especially the American consumer. But I really think that it's going to need the cooperation of bars, restaurants, and retail shops, right? Because there is shelf space, and I would guess a lot of shop owners or a lot of people who are running bars, they'll just see, okay, American, let's put that next to Wild Turkey. Let's put that next to Maker's Mark or what have you. So where does American Single Malt fit on the shelf? Where should it sit? Does it sit within world whiskey? Should it have its own category? Like, that's another element of education. And we're talking on a level, most people don't even know the TTB, right? So to get to the masses, you have to go through the retailers. You have to go through that front line. So how do we get there? And you may not know the answer, but what are your thoughts on that aspect of the education of the American consumer?
American Single Malt needs its own space on the shelf. Yeah, it needs its own spot in the store. Absolutely. And at this point, with as many makers as we have in this country, I don't see why it shouldn't be. There's enough incredibly good, like, quality single malts being made that it absolutely has its own space. Yeah. And, over the years visiting and, different liquor stores and seeing, it's a fun game to, like, walk in, it's different now, but, like, okay, where did we get put, here? Oh, we're with Japanese whiskey. Okay. Why? And, so again, I think our biggest hurdle is education, and across the board. We've always taken the approach at the distillery that, we want to be heavily involved in, like, the restaurant scene. We love, bringing westward to bartenders, people who are cocktailing. And to us, because we think those people are looking to be, and kind of have to be, a bit more educated because they are kind of these ambassadors, right? Kind of in between distillers, between makers and consumers. Someone's sitting in a bar and they want to try something, the bartender's going to suggest or steer them in a certain direction. Yeah. And so, our approach has always been that way. We're very active in that, especially with the single barrel program too. For, like, just really getting in that way. We're not, I'm more inclined to set up a whiskey dinner with, a restaurant or a chef that I really love and pair my whiskeys with their food than just go into a liquor store and set up a table and try to taste people on Westward. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it doesn't. I would rather show them our passion and our creativity with someone else who shares that same passion. Yeah. Really. That's how we like to do it.
Beautiful. Yep.
Yeah, my question was, you seem to have a really good response. outside of the U.S. and really receptive and really responsive to American Single Malt. Like, yeah, totally, bring it on. What do you think is the, as Joshua said, like kind of running upstream? Like, what is the uphill battle with American Single Malt in America? Like, it's still, even though this category has been growing and becoming more and more legitimate. It's always been legitimate in our eyes, but it's just like, what's the disconnect? Is it like the love of bourbon and rye and that tradition, or is there?
I think it's as simple as the word whiskey, because when you say whiskey in the States, people assume you're talking about bourbon, maybe rye.
Yeah.
When you say whiskey anywhere else in the world, really, just about everywhere else, people assume you're talking about malt whiskey, because that is truly the world whiskey. I mean, it's made all over the planet, you know, blended or single malt. I mean, people, for the most part, that's when you use that term, whiskey, that's what they think of. And so I think it's the word and its connotation.
And so what if they hear the word whiskey?
Whiskey? I haven't tried it, so you might be onto something there. Actually.
Cool whip.
Whip. Would you like to try my whiskey? That might get me kicked out. I don't know.
One of the things that fascinated me a bit as we're tasting through these different barrel samples, and I could be wrong because we are, 9 samples in, and we have a little sidecar of beer here. Thank you again. We were tasting one particular barrel that I just thought was gorgeous, right? And I told you before, when we're selecting casks, we like to take it off site, we're in a controlled environment, et cetera, and I'm tasting this, and I'm thinking, this is one of the best casks I've tasted in 2021. It was just delicious. And as I was thinking that, you'd said, man, I'd love to taste this in an old-fashioned. I'd love to cocktail this. And I love that. I absolutely love that you said it before, whiskey is fun. And so you're all about that? Like you don't care how Westward is consumed. You want to see it single cask strength, in a cocktail. Like, what's your vision for how people should consume and learn about Westward? Having
played in bands and been a musician and trying to understand that world in my previous life, you can't choose your audience and you can't choose how they appreciate your music. So I feel like the same applies to whiskey. And also, it should be fun. And also, whiskey's meant to be drunk. Drink it. I want to make this delicious thing for you to enjoy and bring you enjoyment, have a nice time with, right? It shouldn't just sit collecting dust or be so hallowed and revered that, you can really only try to appreciate it in one way. And to me, that just kind of sucks the fun out of the room. It really does. So, and people ask me this all the time. Oh man, so what if you saw somebody, just dumping a bunch of Coca-Cola in Westward? And I was like, well, I genuinely hope that's how they like it, and they have a really good time with it. I'm not here to tell people how to drink whiskey. So, I mean, okay, I've never actually seen anyone dumping Coca-Cola into Westward, so I can't give you a true, account of how I would respond to that. But I really, it's meant to be enjoyed. So I hope people enjoy it however they want. Truly. That's great. Can I get back to, there's a specific note that I kept getting, and I want to say out of the 9 samples, 6 of them I got it, and it's lavender. And it's so pretty, and somehow followed by baker's chocolate and mole. I got mole with it as well. Like, somehow these notes are living simultaneously in your whiskeys, harmoniously in your whiskeys. And do you know specifically where these flavors are coming from? Or are you just happy they're there? Like, you know what I mean? I do. It's funny to have seen you pick up on the lavender almost right away, because not many people pick up on that, really. And yeah, there's elements of this great florality in Westward that kind of comes and goes, and we're really just so stuck on the fermentation of it, and I mean, if you think about what yeast is and why it does what it does, I mean, it's essentially, it's creating all these esters because out in the world, out in nature, you can't just travel around. It travels on the wind and it travels on animals, right? And bees. And so, it produces these esters that give us this like fruit and floral notes to attract, bees, for example, or, birds. And then they get to transport the yeast around and bring it to other places and give it more opportunities to thrive. And, so then we exploit that to make delicious whiskey. Right? The lavender specifically, I couldn't say how exactly we're producing that ester, but I think it's just an element of this floral aspect that you get in Westward. And sometimes it reads stronger in certain barrels. Yep. I think also sometimes it just reads stronger for certain people. That's there's some people that sip Westward and they're just like, wow, like orange and like, lemon rind. And I'm like, wow, really? And I get a citrus aspect to the whiskey, but we all have different palates and perceive differently. And so, that was pretty cool to see you pick up on the lavender right away. So,
cheers, man.
Yeah. So Joshua's getting a little into the scientific, geeky flavor.
Me pushing up my glasses.
Yes. Geeky approach. And you mentioned just a second ago about you being a musician. I have no musician background. Joshua has a lot of Thank God for edits.
Do you have any background with the American language?
Yes.
Or the English language?
Yeah.
What is that American Single Malt language?
Yes. Joshua has, a lot of experience with being a musician. Mm-hmm. And you guys connected last night, about kind of your passion for music. Beyond the scientific aspect of being a blender and selecting and distilling and creating what Westward is there like an artist's influence? Maybe it's not specific to music, but is there a creativity and passion as far as being an artist and allowing that to kind of shape the way you see whiskey beyond just like geeky, which I enjoy, geeky scientific, like flavors and components, and this is why this happens. Like, do you have any insight on that?
I mean, I think whiskey is the meeting of art and science. It is those two coming together, definitely. Because I think there's an element of this, and you guys have seen this today tasting whiskey with me, there's an element of this that is just kind of out of your hands. It's up to nature about, part of it. And obviously, for the sake of consistency, we try to understand and control a lot of the process, but at some point you just have to let go, like you do. Yeah. Even when it comes to, selecting a cask and saying, okay, this is ready. I've decided this is ready and it's going to go into a blend. I actually think about I've played in bands where, someone is this brilliant songwriter, but the song's never done. It's never perfect enough, right? And they're like, I got to keep working on it. It's like, I think it's pretty good and we should play it, And so you have to find that balance of, well, obviously we want it to be a good song that makes sense and is put together and people enjoy it, but not, 6 months later, like, I think I still need to tweak this, and that chorus is a little weird. It's like, man, let's get this song out there. Yeah. It's a Peter Gabriel syndrome, a lot of us musicians say, where it's just like, man, you got to, at some point, bring it out to the world and let it out. Mm-hmm. And, so it is this funny approach of knowing the science, which is good and bad because you know what you can do, and you also then know what you can't do, which you kind of have to leave up to nature and the climate, that surrounds your whiskey. And then just... kind of trusting your instincts. And there's a creative element to that of, putting together a blend and building that and actually then letting it out into the world. Yeah.
Put it in my mouth.
Put it in your mouth.
Yeah.
Exactly. #
Westward. Put it in your mouth.
I mean, it's where it goes.
One thing that I want to clarify a little bit here is, we're talking about this whiskey being produced from a brewer's perspective. And you're not the only one, right? There's a lot of American single malt producers that are doing that, and really, again, back to that front-loading element, you know, you're trying to pay attention not just to the distillate and how it's matured, but what you're doing to create that distillate, what's happening before that. And I just want to clarify to our listeners, this Westward, if you've not had it before, it doesn't taste like distilled beer, right? There's no hops in it, right? But it's that care that you put into creating the most delicious beer you can to then be distilled, which I think is so interesting when you compare it to cognac producers or maybe some shochu producers. And you'd said before, you take some insight from brandy producers. They're producing wines you wouldn't want to drink to then distill. The shochu producers are producing sakes you wouldn't want to drink to then distill, but you're producing a beer you would want to drink and then to distill. And I think that's a very different approach to whiskey production.
It is, and you know, it's I think a very inefficient way to make whiskey. It truly is.
Yeah.
But it makes the whiskey that we want to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. That's our approach. That's our stamp on single malt is that front loading, that care at the beginning of, and we can't help it as brewers. I mean, that's what you know. I mean, when you're done with fermentation in a brewery, you have, you know, a few weeks of conditioning or longer if you're a lager maker, but that's really it. That's the final chance you have. Yeah. Unless you know you're going to dry hop the living hell out of a beer. That's kind of the final chance you have of like imbuing as much quality as you can into your product. So that's second nature for us. Yeah. You know, that's what we want to do.
Yeah. Yep. Love it. Yep.
Speaking of inefficiency, distillation, the total yield.
That was interesting.
Process of distillation. Could you touch on that just a little bit and give us those numbers and that perspective? Because I found that inefficient.
Yes. We are gleefully inefficient. Really, we are. So we're using ale yeast. It's not a really aggressive yeast, one that, you know, typically a lot of distillers are going to go for because we're creating a lot less alcohol. You know, our wash when it's headed to the still is 8.5% ABV.
Yeah.
You know, really not that high.
Yeah.
And so, but for us, that's the yeast we want, and that's the yeast that makes it delicious, and so that's what we're going to use. You know, that's what we're doing. I mean, our wash still is 3,000 gallons, 11,000 liters ish, and you know, after our 2 distillations, we have about, you know, 4.5 to 5 barrels of whiskey, of usable new make that's going to get into 4.5 to 5 barrels. So, you know, basically from 3,000 gallons or 3,100 gallons to about 225 gallons.
Right, and that
crazy.
It's crazy because you
drives our accountants mad. They hate it.
Because you do hear the common ratio tends to be your distillate, right? Your heart's cut off your second distillation is about 10% of what that original volume is, and you're working below that 10% margin.
Yep,
and that's is that a combination of is that just because of the yeast you're using, or is it also a slightly lower yield barley because you're after that flavor from the barley and not necessarily just for volume?
That is a very keen observation, my friend. Yes, because we use what our maltster calls a high color base malt. We are sacrificing just a little efficiency in our yield for more flavor.
Okay.
I mean, that's really what it is. We're sacrificing yield altogether across the board for flavor, and we think in the end it's worth it.
I agree.
Given today, yes.
And you know, we've tried, you know, M1, the ubiquitous, you know, single malt yeast strain, and it's just, it's not for us. It just isn't getting to where we want the new make to be. I said it earlier today. I mean, we refer to our new make as barley eau de vie. You know, it's just got tons of character, just great flavor.
No off notes,
really
either.
no like rough edge to it much at all.
Yep.
And and it's seen no time in oak and no age, no oxidation. That's just right off the still.
Yeah, sometimes I'll taste a new make and I'll find an off note and I'll think, ooh, that's going to age nicely in the cask. That's going to turn into this, that, or the other thing, but it's off. Where your new make, there was no off. It was just gobs of fruit.
Yeah, well, and that's our method. And so I think for other distillers who have very different approaches and different methods of making whiskey, they don't really consider those flaws because they know, given a certain amount of time, and the elements, that will turn into something more beautiful, really something tasty. Yeah. For us, Westward's designed to be young. We want it to be really bright, and we want those fruit notes to be really, really bright, really robust, and not really kind of fall off and get too flat.
So we have one question we always close with. Elijah, would you like to ask that closing question?
Let's hope that I don't butcher it. But
I'm judging you silently, also audibly, as our listeners can attest to.
Yes, all the listeners will hold me accountable. But for Westward, and maybe even for American Single Malt, what are you looking forward to? What gets you excited? What are you excited about in the future?
So many things. So, for example, there's independent bottlers, as yourselves. They're popping up more and more around the States, which I think is fantastic. That shows that there's just that many more quality single malt makers here in the States. Lost Lantern, for example. We were part of their first vatting.
Yeah.
And I think the best part of that was, they used 6 different distillers, single malt makers, but from like literally every corner of the States. Seattle here, down to Santa Fe, Texas, Virginia, up to Massachusetts. That's amazing to me. I love that. To me, that's that's the brave new world. That's, something we're looking forward to for sure. And then just more experimentation. I mean, we're diving ourselves into more finishes, obviously always experimenting with different yeast strains.
Yeah.
What's exciting for me is just to take this to more people, bring this out to more people in the world and show them what we're up to. Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, our designation. Huge step.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely
over
huge.
The moon for that.
Yeah.
That is massive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the weekend or two. I don't even know how long we've been with you. It feels like a long time, but in the best way. It's been a great couple days, and here getting to taste through a bunch of samples with you in the barrel house, and then this fine-ass beer at the end.
Yeah, man.
Sweet Fancy Moses. That's
Buddy,
really good.
honestly, this is my pleasure, really. And,
Cheers.
Brings me joy to, bring people into our world and show them what we're doing. So
Awesome.
Thank you guys, really.
Cheers.
Cheers.
That was excellent. Thanks so much to you for making the time for that, Elijah for rolling up his sleeves and jumping in, and obviously for Miles for sitting down and taking all those questions. You're spot on. As we led into that, you talked about Elijah asking questions that advanced the conversation, and it really happened. That's very cool. I love watching the growth of our company, the expansion of our company, and as we've added Jess and now Elijah, I love that there's more of us striving to do good work here.
Yeah, we'll get him on more and more. I thought his questions were good. You could tell. I mean, you heard it in his voice. He was a bit nervous to, be asking this question while being recorded. But the question was there, and the question was good. So he'll get over that nervousness, and he'll continue on with the good question.
He can go back and listen to our episode 1 anytime he wants. So
Yeah, right?
I think we're going to be very generous here. Very, very generous. Interesting there listening to the focus on brewing. And not too long ago, we had good conversation with our friends at Copperworks, Jason and Jeff over there. Focus on brewing happening there. Here we are still in the Pacific Northwest, down in Portland with Westward, that same focus on brewing and the idea that you get out what you put in. Do your work early, earn the rewards later. And in listening to Miles in his role as a blender, it was wonderful hearing about those payoffs that he experiences from having the brewers make the very best lager possible.
Yeah, it was really interesting to get that perspective. Granted, single malt producers in Scotland are doing exactly what he explained, right? They're making a consistent wash to then be distilled so that in the end, hopefully the blending process is easier. However, it's quite clear they're going after very specific flavors. And it gets back to this idea of front loading, of putting the work in early. Like you'd said, you put the work in early to get very specific flavors. You may suffer in yield, but in the end, what you're doing is you're set out to make a very specific flavor profile, and hopefully, if you've done things right, in the end, the blending should be a bit easier if you've had that consistency in fermentation. And it really amazed me that you taste their wash, which is just an unhopped lager. It's really delicious. And that's all it tastes like, though, right? Just a nice, clean, unhopped lager. But then all of a sudden, lavender comes out of it, and mangoes, and chocolate, and dried apricots, and all of these flavors through distillation and maturation. It's just wild to me what can come of it.
Well, we're clearly fans of the L word. That little bit of lavender can go a long way. Did you taste any samples where that lavender became more pronounced?
So let me set the record straight here. We selected for Single Cask Nation 2 casks. Cask 423 had a bit of lavender on it, which I was really drawn to. And that one, I think I mentioned it in the recording, or I know I mentioned it in the recording, but I'm trying to think. I know we just re-listened to it, but I made a comment where I said one of these casks was perhaps the best cask of whiskey, single cask, I had tasted in 2021.
It's a hell of a claim.
It's a hell of a claim, and I think it was cask 423. It had to have been cask 423, and just that delicate lavender, just hugging the backbone, right? Where that backbone is the stone fruit, it is that chocolate, and just this luscious quality to it. But the lavender is never too far away. So we selected that one, and then we selected a second cask, and this was actually Elijah's favorite of the trip, and that was cask number 304. So cask 423 is their standard number 2 char and their standard yeast, their standard malt, etc. Cask number 304, the char is the same, the yield is the same. The difference is they're using an extra special malt in this, so it's a slightly different type of barley that is giving us a bit more funk going on, a bit more heft to the overall experience.
Okay. And a second ago you said the yield is the same. Did you mean the yeast is the same?
Sorry, I did mean the yeast is the same.
Cool.
Yep. Apologies.
I figured. I just wanted to be clear for the listener. That sounds excellent. Sounds lovely. Clearly, here we are in December of 2021. We're not going to see these until 2022, but it's exciting that there are more selections out in the world with our name on it, and the spirit of collaboration looms large.
That it does, and I'm looking forward to the next 2 that come after this. This is only the start of our relationship with Westward, and this is something that, Jason, you and I have been trying to do since we started the company. is when you start a relationship, you maintain it and you nurture it, and and that's done on many levels, and part of it is just that gospel. I have had bits and bobs of Westward before going to the distillery. I knew enough, right? Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until actually spending a couple days with Miles and just spending some time at the distillery where I got to explore more of their standard releases. And like their Pinot Noir cask now, I can't get enough of it. Like this trip has turned me into a casual appreciator of Westward and converted me into a huge appreciator and someone who wants to spread the gospel, not just through our own bottlings, but to tell people about the Pinot Noir cask, tell them about the stout cask, tell them about some of the other bottlings that they're doing. Right, we do this with every distillery.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah,
right.
This is why we're in it, right? Yeah. And I come back to an old story. Gosh, 8 years ago now. Gosh, when I was in LA and there was a chap at the tasting who had said, "I'm in the nation now. I'm in the nation for the long haul. You guys are curating whiskey for me." The world of whiskey, and this ties in beautifully with where we started the episode, you know, the world of whiskey is huge. There's so much to know. There's so much to learn, so much to discover. When you say, have a look at this distillery, it goes a long, long way. And from this year, going down to Virginia Distillery Company for the first time, they're now somebody we wax lyrical about. Obviously, we've got our long-term friends at Catoctin Creek, at Westland. We've got Jason and Jeff at Copperworks. Here's Miles at Westward. Like, these are people we're learning about, and putting out there, talking about, and saying, hey, there is a lot to select from. Give that a try. Give that a look. What did we say earlier about if Kilchoman was on that restaurant whiskey list? I'd give Kilchoman that little, that little nod. And so, it's exciting. I love it when there's new discoveries being made and new discoveries being shared with the nation, with the podcast. That's why we're here.
Yep, exactly. So normally at this time, we would be calling in the paperboy because we would have news to share. We don't have news to share this time around. Nothing new. Is there something maybe I'm not thinking about, Jason?
Well, let's give him a gentle shake. Maybe there's 2 or 3 things we could talk about on the other side.
Extra, extra! Read all about it. Life story of Playboy Penny. Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it. Me and that Playboy in trouble again.
So in the last episode, we talked about the Crofton Gaea for the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation charitable offering, and the Beanley, the 14-year-old rum. We talked about those being limited to 1 bottle per nation member here in the US, and there were still some available in the store. We just had the Thanksgiving break last week from the launch of this episode, and we have announced reorders of those are available. And so long as we have those in stock, if you've ordered previously, thank you very much. Please return to the singlecasknation.com front page and you'll see both bottles in stock there. Obviously, it is rapidly depleting, but if you want to do another go around on the pickup, you are more than welcome to do so. It has been wonderful as bottles are reaching the nation and being opened. Hearing how much people are enjoying them is music to our ears. A 16-year-old peated Highland single malt and a 14-year-old Australian rum. They're great things to drink through the festive season, through the end of November into December, New Year. Those are things for sharing. Real good bottles for sharing. Yeah,
speaking of which, I took a bottle of our we took a bottle of our Beanley and our Laughing Frog bottle to the Owl Shop here in New Haven. And so the shop owner there, Glenn Greenberg. So Glenn was there. Yoni Miller, our cigar czar, was there. And Eric Shao, who's a local Connecticut Nation member, and Nick Conti, who is a shop owner here. And we were just sitting around smoking cigars and drinking the Laughing Frog and drinking the Beanley. And the Beanley really captured the attention of everyone on the table. No one, not a single person, myself included, I had to go back and do a double take on the ABV. You would not know that it's 65.1% alcohol. Like, it's not even close. It just is drinking like a nice 46%er.
Yeah.
Maybe 50.
Yeah.
Maybe 50.
Maybe 50. I was telling you that before we hit record over here. Like the other day, my sample bottle came in from the company. I opened it of an evening. I poured one. I sat, enjoyed it, watched some TV with my wife. Before I knew it, I'd poured a second. Continued to enjoy some TV with my wife. Before I knew it, I'd poured a third. Like it just kept drinking.
Can I make a little suggestion, Jason?
Date night?
Yeah, let's have a little date night with a little Beanley. What do you say we pour a little Beanley in our glass and
All right.
talk about it a little bit?
Let me just reach down beside myself here.
There you go. Jeez,
That's a squeaker.
I was going to say, you got a real tight cork.
Of all the things you've said to me on our many date nights.
Of all the things you've said before. So, all right. So I've just poured mine. So this is 14 years old, single cask Australian rum, 65.1% alcohol. And it's funny, the label says second fill bourbon hogshead, and I know that's what the paperwork said, second fill. Distilled August 2007, bottled September 2021, 261 bottles. But if you look at the color, it almost looks like a first fill sherry.
Yeah, it's a beauty.
It's super dark and obviously natural color. There's no sugar added to this rum. There's no caramel coloring added to this rum. It's just rum that spent 13 years maturing in Australia and then a year in the UK. So you already went into the sip. I'm still on the nose here.
I tell you, when it is your first of the day, you get a little bit more of the alcohol. When you're drinking it around lunchtime, yeah. It's a slightly different preposition. Yeah, delightfully drying around the edges.
Yeah, on the nose. It's really fruity on the nose. And I know, sometimes when you're trying to figure out the fruit, I don't know if you do this, but I do this sometimes. Like I'll nose something and I'll get colors of fruit, right? It'll start off with like
red berries.
Red berries or yellow fruit, which may be mango. It may be, it's something like that. And so
green wine gums. That's a fruit.
Yeah, there you go. And so for me, it's wait, green wine gums are a fruit? Wait, what? You're making sure
you're speaking
I'm
to somebody
to
from Scotland over here. Yep. Take your fruit to school. Okay, Mom. Give me the pack of wine gums.
But it really is. It's all fresh mango on the nose. It really is nice and fruity.
Yeah, the thing for me is the rum notes to it are so obvious that it's almost like me when I'm dealing with a peated whiskey. I don't focus on the peat. I don't delve into the peat. I don't envelop myself in the peat. And in this case, I'm not focusing on any of the rum characteristics. For me, it's that oakiness. It's the wood presence that really captures my attention first. And I'm not disagreeing with you. It is sweet. It is fruity. It is unctuous. But it's that oakiness that's a point of difference for me that I'm really investigating first. Really captures my attention immediately.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to live. I'm trying to live within its rumminess, right? Within the distillate itself, because the first rum that we bottled was our 18-year-old Spanish rum. It's 49% alcohol, if I remember correctly, and that rum was matured for the most part continentally. In other words, not where it was produced. So, the producer was located in the Spanish Canary Islands, but the rum cask itself spent most of its time in the UK. And so you had this rum that was almost like a rum for whiskey drinkers, and not necessarily a rum for rum drinkers. It was still a great product, but it wasn't a rum for rum drinkers. And so we bottled this because we fell in love with it. But what it's exhibiting is things we're simply not used to. It's rum for the sake of rum. It's screaming, this is what tropically aged rum should be tasting like. And we're not used to bottling things that are so massively that.
Yeah, the rum category is so interesting to me. And we got into this wonderful conversation with Mitch, with the Black Tot.
Black Tot,
right?
Yep.
And Mitch is talking us through the world of rum. We obviously had a singular focused episode with Richard Seal from Foursquare, and obviously we spoke with Stephen from Beanley just recently. But it's such an interesting world, and I'm not versed in it. And so as you articulate the rumminess, I'm right there with you. I totally get what you're capturing there. But my question for myself is always, and where does that rumminess fit in with the larger world of rum? The same way, and again, it's where we started today's episode. 25 years ago, I'm asking myself, this whiskiness, right? And how does this whiskiness fit in with this world of whiskey? And so there are times that I feel like an absolute noob around rum. And beyond statements like, I like it, or I like it a lot, I'm always searching for the contextual relationship to other rums, to that world of rum.
Okay. So when you'd said you're focusing on the cask, you're focusing on what the wood is doing, I got the impression that, similar to how you used to talk about Japanese whiskeys, where you'd say, I really like it, I'm just having a difficult time wrapping my head around where some of these flavors are coming from and why they're being presented in the way in which they're being presented. And to me, that statement like that comes somewhat from a place of fear. Like, I know I like it, but I'm going to stick over here because I know what the wood is doing. Like, I get that.
It's familiarity. I wouldn't say fear. I would say familiarity.
Familiarity. Okay, so all right. So let's get uncomfortable a little bit. Let's talk about what you're not paying attention to, because I think your point was a good one, right? When we're drinking in our,
I might have misread that. I should put my pants back on. Okay, pants are back on. I've misread where day night was going.
I didn't say that.
Okay, pants are back off again.
Yeah,
okay, let's get uncomfortable.
But I'm trying to get comfortably uncomfortable with this rum, because I think I'm a little less. I shouldn't say less interested. I should say I'm a bit less concerned about where the flavors are coming from, though I feel as if I should be concerned about that, right? I should know where those flavors are coming from. I'm less concerned on where the flavors are coming from and more concerned with how are they different from flavors you'd get in a whiskey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm on board with that wholeheartedly. That to me is, that to me doesn't speak to discomfort, because I think that's that's the familiarity, right? Is what do I know from this category, whiskey, and what am I bringing to this category, rum? And for me, it's when we start talking about the funk, or you start talking about the dunder, and you start talking about distillation processes that I don't fully understand either. Like there's that to me is the nervousness of stepping into a category beyond, do I like it? Would I buy it? Would I pour it? Would I share it? Do I want the nation to know about the Beanley Distillery? Our friend James Foster had reached out over text to say when he and his wife Martha had gone down there, they visited Beanley. They toured it. Mm-hmm. And now here he is with the nation offering up a Beanley that he was able to buy in the US and ship to his doorstep. So he opened this and thoroughly enjoyed it. And so there's that Beanley story going full circle for the Fosters. I will say this, it's incredibly oily on the glass. Incredibly.
Yeah, again, for 65.1.
Huge beads.
Like, I understand you were getting a bit of heat up front.
For an afternoon dram or a lunchtime dram.
And maybe I did the first sip, but now it's just, just liquid at this point. Mm-hmm. But what I love, like, again, getting back to that fruit, these are flavors that you would not get in whiskey. And it's, dried pineapple, crushed pineapple, mango, like pepper on papaya, like cracked black pepper on papaya. It's all these heavy, earthy, jammy fruits that I love finding. Like, it's kind of like with mezcal. There's certain things that you can only get in mezcal.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And it's so wonderful to discover those and figure out where that's coming from. And I love finding it here in this rum.
But I think we've spoken about this previously, where we're growing up in Scotland and the rum category was essentially Malibu, which is a frightening beverage mixed with orange juice.
Oof.
And it's easy to think that all rums are sweet all the time. And I think it's done such a disservice to the category that there's a sweetness there, but it's built on the back of and alongside and on top of other flavors. And so just a second ago, when you were talking about the cracked pepper on pineapple, there's that tropical fruit sweetness, but the pepper connects it back to the wood, right? And I've got a ground grey pepper quality going on here. I've got a bitter chocolate quality going on here. The fact that you can have single cask, tropically aged rums that have such complexity and do speak to maturation, that's the part that I'm really fascinated by and that my palate goes in search of. And as I was saying in our lead into our own little impromptu date night here, is as I was sitting with my wife watching TV, there was a pour and a second pour and a third pour. And right now there's a sip and a second sip and a third sip, where I want to keep putting that unctuous texture across my palate, then allow it to dry out, to then put that unctuous texture and those sweeter tropical flavors back over my palate again. That to me is the fun a drink like this.
Yeah. One of the things that captured my attention when we were speaking with Steve Magary at Beanley was the fact that what we have here is some of that 2007 distillate, which has 2 different yeast types in there, so you're getting some heavier components going on. But what he had pointed out, and the label will say as such, the new Black Top Master Blenders Reserve that has a bit of Beanley in there is from the same distillate, right? It's from what they were doing back in 2007, where they were playing with 2 different styles of yeast. Mm-hmm. And even though there was maybe 6 or 7% of Beanley in that Black Top blend, Steve Magary said it, a ton of people who live on the other side of the pond in the UK who have had it say the Beanley's unmistakable. It just pops. It's so expressive and so attention grabbing. And the fact that we were able to bottle a cask of this highly expressive rum with the Single Cask Nation name on there, that it just, there's a certain level of pride there. That they would work with us and let us bottle something as special
100%. 100%. What's interesting for me is one of the things that I really like about Black Tot, just standard release Black Tot, is it takes on this burnt brown sugar, almost becoming licorice quality to the back of the palate into the finish. Mm-hmm. And as you were sitting here talking, and I was just letting my last sip just kind of dry out, there was that burnt brown sugar. There was that licorice component happening in the back of the palate.
Oh, yeah.
It's just so deliciously complex, drying, rewarding. And I take another sip.
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about this bottle. And sadly, there's only a few remaining, but at least by the time we've dropped this episode, there should still be some on the website. $150 a bottle. There you go. I'm glad I got 2 bottles for me, and I'm very happy about that.
Did you really? I've only got 1.
Do you really? I mean, I only have 1 too. When I said two, I meant I had 1 too.
Oh, you meant also? I'm with you.
Yeah.
But so before the news segment gets completely taken over by the Beanley, there is a similar conversation to be had about a bottling we discussed in the last episode in the news segment, which is the Water of Life collaboration with what we're calling Wolf Island, and my bottle of that finally came in, and that's a retail release. These are purchases that you and I are making of our selections.
Yep.
I can't stop pouring it. And I had a friend come by the house over the weekend. The weather was so delightful. We actually sat out on the back deck and did some al fresco dramming, which was magnificent. But nice. The one that we kicked off with was Wolf Island. And up until that point, I'd been doing with the Wolf Island what we just talked about doing with the Beanley, which was one pour would lead to a second pour, would lead to a third pour. And when he came over the weekend, same thing. Like if we hadn't had more bottles to pour, as we all do, and anybody listening to this podcast knows exactly what we're talking about, you get through a few different pours and you go through a few different bottles. This would have been one we would have just sat and poured all night. We'd have taken care of the bottle. And I know that we've now got Elijah using this language as well, which is pop the cork on a Friday, recycle the bottle on a Monday. Hashtag please drink the whole bottle responsibly. It's incredible how much of a drinker that Wolf Island is. And again, you and I were saying that just before we hit record, you said something about that one peated cask in concert with the 5 unpeated casks. Yep. Do you want to Repeat that on wax.
Well, the whiskey itself is so bright and inviting and fresh and almost refreshing. You know, there's something about, you know, mowing your lawn in the summer and having a Corona with lime that makes that the best thing in the world because it's so refreshing. This whiskey somehow has that refreshing quality to it. And if you just take a second now, all you need is a second to just pause and think about the fact that there is one peated cask in there. Because you wouldn't know it unless you really thought about it. But when you think about that, all of a sudden, the complexity of this whiskey jumps to 11 because now the earthiness is revealed. And now it's not just fresh. It's not just refreshing and bright. Now there's a bit of earthiness. There's something to ground you to that moment. That little bit of heft in the background does so much that if you think about it, it makes the overall drinking experience that much better. And if you don't think about it, well, that's okay. You're still having a great experience. But with that little nugget of knowledge, all of a sudden, the drinking experience becomes that much more.
Yeah, your comment earlier was about the additional earthiness.
Yeah.
And it just felt like a plug, right? When you have the earth in a plug, and you're like, it's the thing that grounds it. It's the thing that connects it to the field, to the barley, to the harvest. Magical, absolutely magical. So, I think you and I are of a mind with this Wolf Island, and certainly my mate who came over during the weekend was of a mind as well. He's actually going to be spending the holiday season in Texas and was asking if he'd be able to find it at Specs. And I said, I don't know. It's not part of my remit. But he is going to be looking for bottles of this in Texas to enjoy over the festive period with family. We wish him the best of luck in sourcing that wherever he finds himself or wherever you find yourself, dear listener. Final couple of comments in this news segment. US retail release number 8 continues to go out, state upon state. Feedback keeps coming back. Excellent selections. Very proud of us. On Rest of the World, release number 3, I know Jess is working her tail off. I know the orders are coming in across the UK for that to go into key stockists. Keep refreshing web pages. As soon as we know, we will share. I know it is going to start showing up in Sweden. I know it is going to start showing up in Germany and Israel. Jess continues to do her best with an incredibly difficult hand connected to Brexit and logistics and COVID and shipping. Deep breaths for everybody. Enjoy the whiskey when you see it.
Brexit. I've heard of that.
Never heard of it. Brand new information. COVID. What's that now? Nationwide lockdowns in Europe? No, thank you. Moving on. That's me for the news. Those were the few bits and bobs that I wanted to put in front of our listeners. And I think spending time with a rum from down there has been incredibly rewarding as well.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say, to your mate here who's looking for the Wolf Island collaboration potentially in Texas, I think your point was a really good one, is that release number 8, or retail release number 8, of which the Wolf Island Collaborative bottling is a part of, is only just starting to hit store shelves. And so just keep an eye out. You can always reach out to office@impexbev.com. And, if you need to find a bottling near you or a shop that can ship to you, they'll take care of that request. It's exciting. I'm seeing more and more of these bottlings popping up all around, and people are connecting with them. People are digging the whiskeys and the rum. The Apres rum is really turning heads.
Eyeballs are rolling back into their head. And then, very final comment here. I know Greg and the team at the Water of Life film, they're in love with this collaborative bottling as well that they were a part of. You know, and if you're going to put your name on it, you better love it. And they were part of the process, and they love it as well. So they're championing it. Greg is talking about that on his podcast, Big Man We Dram. And it's just getting a ton of mileage, and that makes me incredibly happy, just like the movie's getting a ton of mileage, and that makes us all incredibly happy as well.
Yep. All good stuff. So listen, that's it for news. And normally we would jump into emails here, but we are in the mode, as the kids say, of collecting emails for our annual mailbag episode, which happens in February. Now, here we are, it's December 1, and we really would like... Jason, when do we want questions to come in by?
January 30 is our traditional date. January has 31 days. January 30 is our tradition, probably based on a former Friday. We also crunched the numbers the other day, and the mailbag episode will be February 9 of 2022.
There you go. So, yes.
But as you say, I have started printing out emails for the mailbag episode. I'm going analog for that day's delivery.
Listen, the trees around the world want to thank you for printing on one of their dead compatriots.
100% recycled paper in my printer. You're welcome. I thought of it. Don't you worry. I'm ahead.
So go ahead and send us your emails for the mailbag episode. Again,
Sorry.
Oh, that's a Vino-Seal. That's a Vino-Seal coming off of a Wolf Island bottle.
Sorry.
Well done, you.
Ignore me. Ignore me. I'm not here doing this.
Send us in a whiskey-related question, a personal question, anything that you would want to ask. We will see about answering it. You could reach out to us, questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com. You could tweet at us @OneNationWhiskey. You could Instagram us @OneNationUnderWhiskey, or you can find us on Facebook. Just do a search for One Nation Under Whiskey. And of course, Jason, is whiskey, do we ever spell whiskey with an E?
Never. Take all your E's, gather them up, take them to a club in the 90s and the early 2000s, sell them to the 18-year-olds.
Yeah. So spell the whiskey without the E. I have no idea what you just said, but we'll just move on. And
E's are good. Is Ebenezer good? Clubbing
Ebenezer
anthem,
good?
Late 90s,
What?
early 2000s. Ecstasy, Joshua. We're talking about ecstasy. All the kids and their ecstasies at their raves and their acid parties.
Oh, you're talking about the drug ecstasy and E.
Known as E among the kids.
Okay. So do that. Listen to some Prodigy. I don't know.
Right, exactly. Prodigy,
right? What else?
man.
What else do you do when you're high on ecstasy? What does one do when they're high on ecstasy, Jason?
Drink a lot of water because it will dehydrate you like nobody's business.
Yep.
So hydrate. Tell the people you're with how much you love them. Be tactile. Tactile is encouraged.
Okay, as in touch people.
In
Today's climate,
Joshua,
yeah.
I tell you, you're starting to make me feel uncomfortable. I'm going to put my pants back on. This is... Yeah, you touch them up, you rub their arm, or you gently caress their face. Come on, man.
Okay, so do you have a whistle? Do you need a whistle to take E?
I think so.
Or
I actually, for the longest time, believed that every E sold came with a whistle. Like a Happy Meal. McDonald's will be fine with us connecting Happy Meals and ecstasy, right? This isn't going to be a problem. Should we put this in front of legal?
Yeah, they're not litigious at all.
No, I think we're safe here.
Yeah.
Maybe a few beeps in what I just said 30 seconds ago. Or it might end up on the cutting room floor, which would be perfectly fine too.
Oh, Jason, it has been a treat hanging with you, talking with you.
I think we have brought in December in a fine manner. And now my eyeballs are on December 15, the dropping of our world single malt conversation for the year.
My eyes are on December 6th, which is, as we know, the most important date in the Gregorian calendar.
It has taken on the importance of December 25th for some people.
You're not wrong, at least for one person.
Sweet Scott?
Yeah, two people. There you go. You're right. Yeah, I'd like to wish Chris Sweet Scott Hallstrom a very early birthday on December 6th. Happy birthday. I'd like to wish you a birthday.
And I'm sure Chris Sweet Scott Hallstrom would like to wish you an early happy birthday for the same date.
Oh, what a guy. And Raj Sabarwal, who has been on the podcast before,
He has?
Listen, if you're living in America and you've enjoyed Amrut at any point in your life, or Five Lions, Five Lions, Waterford, you can thank this gentleman, this absolutely lovely person who also shares a December 6th birthday.
He is most definitely a mensch on the bench.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jason, it has been really real.
The realest of the real. Enjoy the rest of Hanukkah and your birthday.
You as well. Yeah.
And listeners, we will have another One Nation Under Whiskey, December 15. Until then, I bid you adieu.
I bid you a jaunt.